Hello and welcome to Gardening 101 with Good Green Gardens. This is Jen, your garden guide. Today we're going to be talking about gardening methods, plant selection, site selection, growing styles, and plant care to get you your gardening basics and comfortable planting your crops this year. Whether it be a flower in the window, a little bit of basil, or a full-scale homestead family feeding operation. Let's get to it. First off, I want to clear something up. This feels important to me because it's come up a lot. It's something I hear from a lot of gardeners. I want to put you at ease. You're not late. Okay, let's just start off by saying that late means next year. Okay? All right, I'm glad we cleared that up. So let's talk gardening methods. What do I mean? Well, let's just say there are infinite ways to garden, but there are a few that most people find themselves trying. I'm talking about the difference between indoor and outdoor growing, planting in a raised bed versus planting in the ground. Let's keep it simple. I like to think of gardening as a cultivation of the soil first practice. In other words, you're prioritizing the cultivation of the medium over the cultivation of the plants, which over time at least produces healthier, stronger, more abundant plants. What does this mean? Well, it means different things in different situations or different methods of gardening. For instance, using a good quality potting soil will support your plants growing in containers. Applying a lot of compost and peat to your soil in your garden bed will enhance the growth of your plants and the microbiome for the growing season. When constructing a raised bed, the better the fill going in, the better the gardens will do in their first years. When it comes to hydroponic setups, the more you can invest in your systems going into it, the better results you will have. This avoids a lot of the steeper parts of the growing curve. It's best if you don't try and cheat with your growing medium. You can cheat with light, you can cheat with water, you can even, to a degree, cheat with nutrients. Don't cheat with your soil. This is worth the investment. So if there are infinite ways to garden, how does that help you? Well, it means use what you have. Do you have a balcony? Do you have a patio? First step to gardening is figuring out what you have, where your growing spaces are, and what you're going to be able to do. So whether that be indoor, whether that be container garden, or whether you have a piece of land. Once you've decided to plant in the ground or in a container inside or outside, you're already 1/5 of the way there to being a full-fledged gardener. Knowing your conditions for growing will help inform you of what type of plants are best suited for the environment you've selected. For instance, planting spinach on a sunny windowsill, while it might look like it's going well for the first couple weeks, will turn into sadness and disappointment if your window is room temperature or better, as spinach prefers cold or cool climates and the intensity of the direct sun. Now that you know how you're going to grow, what are you going to grow? Let's talk about plant selection. Firstly, what do you like to eat? What are you curious about? How many days will it take to grow what you'd like to grow in order to harvest? And do you have that many growing days in your season if you're growing outside? Space and light requirements are essential. Your baby plants won't stay babies for very long. They're cute and all when they're little, but they need space. And if you know what to expect, it should be on the seed packet or the information you get when you buy a seedling, then you can plan ahead. And trust me, they do really get that big. Light is food. Now, don't get me wrong, some plants do prefer the shade. Some plants are very heat intolerant, like hostas, and require a certain amount of shade. Most thrive on sunlight, especially the plants you're growing that you'd like to harvest from. So the more hours of sunlight you can get your beans, your corn, your peas, your tomatoes, the better chance you stand at a super abundant crop. The bare minimum number of hours for those types of plants, your crop plants, are generally 6 hours. And keep in mind that unless you're living near the equator, that will change seasonally. So the areas you're getting the most sunlight in early spring aren't necessarily the same places you'll be getting full sunlight 6 hours daily or better in the height of the summer when all the leaves have come in on the trees and the sun's at a different angle. When starting your garden, you have the option of planting seeds or starting with a live plant. All are valid. When I plant my gardens in the summer, I use a mixture of transplants, both from stores and that I've grown myself indoors earlier in the season and then hardened off by slowly increasing exposure to the outdoor climate that they're going to be growing in. And I plant seeds directly at various points in the season. It all depends on what you want to grow. A lot of varieties are only available by seed, but a lot of cool climate gardeners especially find great value in purchasing seedlings for transplant into their garden to get a jump start on an already short growing season. Another way to get ahead in the garden is to have your plants already planted. What do I mean? Well, I'm talking about perennials. First, let's talk about the difference between annuals, biennials, and perennials. You may have heard these terms before. Anything that grows in your garden and dies in one growing season is an annual. So where I live, I plant a tomato, it grows really well, it dies, and it does not come back next year. That's an annual. A perennial is something that comes back year after year. This doesn't mean it lives forever. We do have some short-term perennials, but it means that I can count on things like my rhubarb showing up in springtime without having to plant it. Another way to already have things planted is fall crops. There are certain things you can overwinter, like parsnips, and then there's garlic. That has to be planted in the fall, along with bulbs like tulips and daffodils for your flower gardens and pollinator beds. Biennials usually grow an abundant mass of foliage or leaves the first year, and then do whatever it is they're supposed to do the next year. Hollyhocks can be like this, some foxgloves are like this, and there are even vegetables like this. Something like a purple sprouting broccoli where you plant it early in the fall, the year before you intend to harvest, and then in the spring of the next year it starts to produce shoots, little purple tinged broccoli florets, and you can harvest them and you're already harvesting from your garden long before you've planted most of your crops. And what makes a biennial different than a perennial is that once your biennial has flowered or produced fruit or vegetable, as the case may be, it's done and it won't be back the next year. Ultimately, when it comes to plant selection, plant what makes you happy. If you are growing for food, plant the foods you like to eat the most. It also helps to know what's in abundance around you. For instance, I live near farmers who grow beautiful organic crops. So what they're growing in abundance, like turnips, a lot of the vegetables I store for winter, I won't focus on growing them as much in my gardens, maybe one or two for fun, but I'll let them do the heavy lifting. I'll let them do the job they're good at and support them while I grow the plants that interest me the most or the things that are hard to sell as a crop. Some of the most delicious foods do not transport well, and every gardener has grown at least something that has been the most delicious of that something they've ever grown. If we're talking about me, that's everything. I think that everything that comes out of my garden tastes infinitely better. Of course, freshness matters, and the flavonoids in the soil matter, and you can build those by either the presence of worms or adding worm castings, or just creating a healthy soil, healthy growing environment. I know I might be partial, but I think if you dug into it, you could prove scientifically that food freshly grown in a home garden, in a container, in the ground, wherever it's grown, if it's grown close to home with love, it will taste so delicious. Now, a couple things about site selection. You already know how you're going to grow your plants. You might have an idea of what you're going to grow, so now you're ready to pick out where exactly you're going to grow it. This is a lot simpler if we are talking about container gardening because you're not committed. You can pick your container up and you can move it. If you're planting in the ground or in a bed, obviously this is a decision you want to put some time into. There are a couple important factors to consider. The first is you want a moderately level area, so something without too much slope. We've already talked about light, so you want to pick an area if you're in the northern hemisphere with good southern exposure. If you have to pick between getting morning sun or evening sun, most of the time for a flowering or for a food producing plant, I recommend favoring morning sun because it seems to give the plants the most energy. And remember to plant your tallest plants to the north side, or if you happen to be a southern hemisphere gardener, to the south side of your garden to ensure that they don't shade out the rest of the plants growing there. If you're choosing a location early in the spring, remember that the leaves will come in on the trees if you have any around, so be sure to notice where you're likely to receive a lot of shade in the day once those trees have come in. The final consideration is more about you than the plants. If you can have your garden growing close to a window you can see it from, you're more likely to head out there and spend time in it. So, line of sight from a window, it's not a priority, but it's certainly worth considering. Let's talk about growing styles. Now, your style of growing will depend largely on your method of growing. And your style of growing can be anything from just winging it and seeing what happens when you let nature take its course, or it can be things like no-till gardening, gardening in rows, back to Eden methods of gardening, permaculture, market gardening, cool weather assisted gardening, growing under cover or in hothouses and in cold tunnels, also referred to as year-round gardening. By referring to gardening styles, I'm merely inviting you to dig deeper once you get going into all the different ways you can enhance your growing processes using what you already have. Talk to other growers, check out YouTube. There are so many talented, brilliant gardeners on YouTube. No matter how much you know about growing, there is always more to learn. Which brings us to plant care. Just the basics for today. You need to feed your plants. This goes back to what I was saying about cultivating your soil or your growing medium first. Let's imagine it's 5 years down the road. You've been growing in raised beds and you've added lots of compost every year. You've used lots of mulch to keep your soil always covered so that you're really building up the topsoil and not losing any of it to the wind or erosion. You've been planting lots of different crops in this same raised bed with different nutrient profiles and a few legumes, so you've had good nitrogen fixing in the soil. Let's say at the end of this 5 year pattern, you get your soil tested. You might find that you don't even need to add any more compost, that your nutrient profiles are very high, and that your acidity is right where it ought to be. You may have built yourself a system that no longer requires any more inputs beyond the plants, and maybe not even that if what you have is a perennial garden bed. That might be an ideal situation, but for a beginner gardener, it's not a likely situation. So, what can we do? We can wing it. Again, I am 100% on board with anybody just going for it. But you do need to feed your plants, whether that's compost, whether that's a synthetic fertilizer, or whether that's going all the way and making sure that the water you're giving your plant is adjusted to the appropriate pH, that is acidity or alkalinity, for your plant's best life. That varies from plant to plant, and that is some next level stuff. So your plants need food, they need water, they need adequate protection or cover or shelter or supports for their unique needs. So structure, safety like a house. You have to make sure that the environment can accommodate them. You need to make sure that you have enough light, which again is kind of like saying food. And then the only other two areas you really need to focus on about plant care when it comes to gardening, other than weeding, which you know about, and so we're just going to ignore that topic entirely, is pruning. Not everything requires pruning. Some plants, like pepper plants, thrive from pruning. If you prune back some vegetation, you will notice it explode with leaves all over. You can wind up forcing huge harvests off of a single pepper plant merely by intensively pruning it in the method that stresses it the best way possible. So, again, to sum up plant care, you got to feed it, you have to water it, you have to put it in a suitable environment, you need to give it enough light, and you can or can't prune it. Your choice. Final plant care tip is harvest. So if this is a plant that's going to continue staying alive, you want to be very careful with harvest. Use scissors even when you think you can pull it away. I am guilty of trying to twist the zucchini off or pull the cucumber, thinking I can get away with it, and I've ripped my fair share of plants out of the ground, and we all make mistakes. I'll leave it at that. Be careful. Use the right tools when it comes to harvesting, and that can be as simple as a sharp and clean paring knife. So we've talked about gardening methods and plant selection. We've talked about site selection. I've hinted at some growing styles to keep your curiosity piqued, and we've talked plant care. Now it's time for aftercare, because as much as plants are great and are lots of fun and growing is awesome, you are part of your garden. So it's extra important to take great care of you. You'll get your best garden that way. So after gardening, you have to take care of your aftercare. Remember to hydrate. Remember to get adequate rest. I know that if you're all in growing the biggest garden you can in the summer, it can be very time consuming and take a lot of your energy. So it's important to rest, and it's important to play, to do things that are light for the sake of levity. Connect with others about your garden. Connect with other growers. We all love to talk plants. And since gardening is a journey, why not keep some sort of keepsake, whether that's a written journal or a photo record of how you've been doing in the garden, just something from year to year, a pressed flower maybe, to remind you of how far you've come in your garden and your growing journey. That's all from me today. I hope you've enjoyed this quick gardening 101. Thank you so much for joining me, and happy growing.